I'm Jay Famiglietti, and the name of this podcast is Let's Talk About Water. But today, let's talk about the absence of water and the severe problems that poses for millions of our fellow human beings. I've researched California's dryness for much of the last 15 years, including the increasing severity of drought and the disappearance of groundwater and of the snowpack. The long term prognosis is not good. And that drying certainly underpins what we believe will be increasingly severe fire seasons in Western North America. Like a lot of other people, I've been riveted by the coverage of the absolutely terrible wildfires burning up and down on the west coast of the United States. It's been especially painful for me to watch all the death and destruction because my wife and I are former Californians. We've worked, lived, and played there. We raised our kids there. We were part of the community there. A lot of the fire swept places you've heard mentioned on the news are places that I know of, that I have visited, and in many cases where we still have family and friends, including our son and daughter who live and work there. This is no abstraction for me. It is very real. It's also kind of eerie because when I moved to Canada a few years ago, it was yet another super severe fire season. En route to Canada, we drove straight up the I 5 through the center of California, literally right through the massive car fire of 2018. The air was thick with smoke, and the temperature was a sizzling 118 degrees Fahrenheit. So flames figure quite strongly in my last memories of my former home state. All that is back again, but it's looking to be bigger and badder this season. By the way, we're getting some of that smoke from the mega fires all the way up to Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, where I live now. And we know from the news that the smoke has made it all the way to Europe. So this is becoming a global problem. Our first guest today is my colleague, my dear friend, and my former neighbor, climate and El Nino expert, and former NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory climatologist, Dr. Bill Patzert. Bill has been studying climate and climate extremes, including how they interact with water, for decades. In addition to his illustrious scientific career, Bill is a renowned science communicator who is routinely sought for interviews by major media outlets around the world. Dr. Bill Patzert joins us today from Sierra Madre, California. Bill, it's great to talk with you, my friend.
Yeah, hello, Jay, from smoky Sierra Madre, your former hometown. Yeah, we're under siege here, not only in Sierra Madre, but up and down the state of California. We're having a record-breaking, painful fire year here.
What's the situation like right there along the Front Range, right there along Sierra Madre? And I've seen various things about Monrovia being Arcadia bits being evacuated. What's happening?
Well, like most fires in California, this one was probably human started, and it's been so dry. You know, August was one continuous heat wave, and we haven't had rain here for months. And so once it started, it exploded. So right now it's about 50,000 square acres up above Sierra Madre, right along the boundary of Sierra Madre, as you know, which is right against the San Gabriel Mountains. These are very rugged. These are the kinds of fires that you actually can't fight them on the ground. So here it's aerial firefighting. And the effort here has mostly been to save lives and structures, essentially save the town. All right.
Right. Yeah.
But
I think, it's hard. We might want to put some pictures up on our website, but I always felt like Sierra Madre in particular and Monrovia, they're so quaint. And part of the reason they're quaint is that they're these old craftsman wooden houses, right?
uh,
And they creep up into the hills and they get too darn close to where the fires are. And I always felt like, and if a fire blows down here, that's like the town is just going to go up in flames.
well, Californians like to live risky. Here in California, we have Sierra Nevada mountains, locally the San Gabriel Mountains, and they interface through wildlands into all these communities in Southern California. And In contrast with Saskatchewan, where the total population is 1 million.
Yeah, it's pretty sparse.
Yeah, we're here in California, all right, smaller than you are, with 40 million people. And so we've moved into areas that historically has always burned. We like risky living here in California.
Yeah, that's for sure. And you know, the earthquakes are part of that, and sea level rise. Those are all part of it. I feel like many people in California, and you know, at some point in time, my family included, you're willing to take that risk for the great lifestyle, the beautiful weather. But you know, things are changing, and I mean, do you feel like in your lifetime? I mean, you're clearly a young man, Bill, but I mean, in your, you know, over your lifetime, just anecdotally, do you think the fires are getting worse? I mean, you know, you've been up at JPL for a long time, and it's pretty hot up there. Do you sense any of this change personally?
Well, like you, Jay, I spent the last 40 to 50 years actually measuring all this. And so there is no doubt. This is the most extensive fire season we've ever had in California. The most extensive, all right?
Yeah, and that's saying
It's,
something because there have been some bad ones.
yeah. And so at this point, it's 3.4 million acres on fire in Southern California. Not only Southern California, it also goes into Oregon and Washington. And so the whole West Coast is aflame. Part of that is some freak meteorology, all right? But
Right,
really, when you look at it, fire is simple. It's fuel plus meteorology plus ignition.
right.
And 95% of the fires are accidentally or intentionally human caused. A new element, of course, in the equation, and that is climate change. California is getting warmer and drier, right? The state is heating up, and in all these areas where you have the urban wildland interface, we've created our own heat. Southern California is a 20 million population megalopolis. And whereas global warming has only been a couple of degrees Fahrenheit, the average in the greater Los Angeles area is 6 to 8 degrees warmer than it was a century ago.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And of course, rainfall patterns have shifted dramatically. The rainfall season comes later, leaves earlier. So it's a longer dry season.
Right. And a shorter snow season, a shorter wet season.
Exactly. And so this has had a tremendous effect on the ecologies of the great forest and the search for affordable housing. We've dramatically spread out all over California rather than building up. And so this makes for an incendiary situation. In the last 22 years in Southern California, 15 have had below average rainfall. And so we're in a multi-decadal drought, which is not unusual for California, by the way. We had the hottest August in the history of Southern California last month, and it just dried everything out. And so the whole state was dried out and what I call desiccated. And we had this freak meteorological event of a tropical hurricane from the Eastern Pacific that actually broke apart and caused a disturbance in the upper atmosphere. And so we had millions of dry lightning strikes, which started most of those Northern
Oh
California
gosh.
fires.
Right.
So that was a freak occurrence.
Yep.
But that goes back to fuel plus meteorology
Yep.
plus ignition.
So my last question for you, Bill. You know, you're an institution in Southern California, well, all over the country, really. But I mean, you've been in Sierra Madre, you've been in that area in Southern California for a long time, right? You were at Scripps for a long time in San Diego. Have you ever thought about getting the hell out of Dodge?
That's an interesting question because I've been retired for 2.5 years now, but I still have given more interviews and done more consulting work than anybody that's presently working at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So I don't know if I'm actually retired. But would I leave LA? I love LA, Jay, mostly because my mortgage is paid for. All right. But it's an interesting place. It has such a multicultural mix. And I have to say one thing, even with the smoke, Arcadia, Temple City, all right, it's got the best food in the world, all right? Vietnamese, Chinese, Japanese, Armenian, all right? And so, plus, I'm an old surfer, so I don't want to get too far away from the ocean.
Okay, well, listen, Bill, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to sometime in the near future we can sit outside Mother Moo's in Sierra Madre, California, and have an ice cream together.
Yeah, so great seeing you, Jay, and
You too. I wish we
thanks.
could see each other in person.
Well, eventually.
Bill Patzert is a climate expert, NASA JPL's former climatologist, and my dear friend who once referred to my daughter as a younger, more attractive version of me. We've talked about the role climate and weather have played in this disaster with my old friend Bill. Now, let's go straight into the flames, metaphorically speaking, by talking to a fire expert. Crystal Kolden is a pyrogeographer at the University of California, Merced, who studies the past, present, and future of wildfires. So you could say, as unfortunate as it may be for ordinary folks, Crystal is in her element this month in California. Thanks so much for joining us, Crystal.
Thank you for having me.
How close have you gotten to these fires? Where are you now? Are you in Merced right now?
I am actually in Fresno, and I am about, 40, 50 kilometers from the nearest wildfire, which is the Creek Fire burning in the Sierra National Forest, south of Yosemite National Park. So we're close enough to be inundated with smoke and hear some of the helicopters and planes flying overhead, but far enough to not be in any danger. We've been monitoring it pretty closely, though. There's quite a few scientific experiments that are actually either in the way of the fire or have already been burned. And so, for a fire scientist, we're sort of watching a lot of these fires very closely, including the one that's close to where I'm at, because it's an opportunity for us to ask new and interesting science questions as these areas burn.
So, what kind of questions do you ask?
So, a lot of what we don't really understand about fire has to do with uh, sort of the fine scale stuff. And what I mean by that is, we have a decent idea of why fires start where they do, how they burn over large areas, and what some of the drivers are that determine how big these fires are going to get and sort of where they're going to go, what fuels they burn in, and which direction they move across the landscape. But the things that we don't know are sort of those things that are the minutia. We don't actually even know how trees die from being burned at this
Wow.
point, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. We should know
Yep.
how a tree dies
Yep.
after being burned, but we don't. And so a lot of the things that we are still trying to work on, and when we see a fire burn an area that has been under scientific study and that we have a really good understanding of how ecosystem and hydrological processes and earth processes are working on that site, when it burns, we're very keen to get in quickly after a fire burns through and sort of study it closely.
Okay, I want to switch to talk a little bit about large scale fire management and maybe how fire management policy uh, may be changing or should
Yeah.
change. So when you look at say the forests in the western U.S. or in the northern part of the United States, or even up
Yeah.
here the boreal forests in Canada and around the world. What sort of things are we not doing? Let's just focus on the U.S. I mean, what sort of things are we not doing that we should be doing?
Yeah, so one of the key things that we talk about a lot from a science communication perspective that is applicable uh, from the Western US, but all the way up into BC and to some extent in Alberta as well, is that throughout Western North America, we have what are basically considered dry pine forests, right? So these are forests that are adapted to fire. For centuries, they had fairly frequent, low intensity fires that were started either by lightning, regular frequent lightning, or by the indigenous populations that would essentially, every few years light off a fire, and you would clear out the understory in these forests. And for indigenous people, they did this for cultural reasons, trying to promote certain plants or to keep a trail clear, things like that, right? Lightning areas, of course, there's an enormous amount of dry lightning in Western Canada along the Rockies and in the Okanagan Valley. And so that regular fire kept those forests relatively free of a lot of that understory vegetation, right? Many of these forests are essentially overstocked, right? They have a buildup of too many trees. Their density is really high, and they have become, in many ways, unhealthy. And that same high density of trees actually also makes them really susceptible to things like bark beetle infestations, which, of course, Western North America, including Western Canada, has seen an enormous amount of tree mortality from bark beetle infestations. And during droughts, those trees are competing for a very finite amount of soil water. And so you have tree mortality associated with drought conditions. All of this ends up producing forests where there's a heck of a lot of fuel and there hasn't been enough fire. And so when wildfires happen, that's when we see these massive conflagrations in forests that were not adapted to that incredibly high intensity fire. In a lot of Western North America, the sort of big science push right now is towards this combination of removing a lot of that dense understory through some type of thinning, and it's predominantly understory thinning, taking out small trees, not the big logging operations as much, and then reintroducing over multiple episodes prescribed fire into these systems so that they can be returned to the historical ecological processes that maintain them for centuries, and so that we can reduce a lot of that wildfire risk. The challenge in the Western US is that, of course, all of this forest management and the problems with the ways that we have managed forests and suppressed fire for a century, that is contributing to increasing wildfire risk and sort of larger, more destructive wildfires. But then there's also climate change, right? And of course, the science is very clear that climate change is amplifying all those things. It is what we call the threat multiplier, right? So if there was no anthropogenic climate change and it was just forest management, yeah, we might see some more active and more intense fires and some bigger fires, right? And if there had been no forest management whatsoever that produces this problem, we would absolutely still be seeing bigger fires. And we're seeing these in the boreal forests, which have not, particularly in the far north, where those forests have not been managed or fire suppressed, really. And we're seeing bigger fires up there, right, in the Arctic. So that is 100% climate change, right? And so in Western North America and in the Western US in particular, we've got both of those things, plus a whole heck of a lot of people that now live in the Western US and are building, homes and communities further and further into sort of these areas that were once sort of wildlands, right? And all of those things together end up producing the complex problem, what a colleague of mine once called the wicked problem of wildfire.
So this goes beyond the sweeping of the forest that President Trump. So I mean, we need more than like 50 people with brooms.
The complexity scares people. It particularly scares politicians who want single silver bullet solutions, right? And so for a president whose entire political existence has been about one-liners, it's not a surprise that that he would embrace something as like, well, if we just rake the forest, it'll all be fine. I was a firefighter myself. The tool of choice as a firefighter was a rake. It's a tool we call a McLeod, and it's a sort of a modified rake, right? So for me to say that there's no raking involved would be false, because of course we use rakes to try and do fire management. But it is so much bigger and more complex than that. And if we're going to address the wildfire problem, we have to acknowledge that complexity, acknowledge that climate change is a big piece of it, and that it is only going to continue changing as we see more and more of the effects of climate change, and that forest management is also a piece of that is incredibly complex.
Well, Crystal, I am not surprised that you have found yourself as a professor, because you're a natural teacher, and I've learned so much today. Crystal Kolden is a pyrogeographer at the University of California, Merced. She's speaking with us today from Fresno, California. Thank you so much,
Thank you so
Crystal.
much for having me. It was a pleasure.
We've heard from two experts about how climate and the wildfires are intimately intertwined. But to give us a true picture of how ferocious the Bobcat fires are in LA, Hayley Smith joins me from the Highland Park area of LA to talk about the direct effects the fires are having on the community. Hayley reports on breaking news for the Los Angeles Times.
I have like the froggiest throat right now because of this air quality here is just terrible.
Okay, so we need to talk about that, because I think it's really hard for people who are, east of the West to really understand. Although we do get some of that smoke up here, it is not the same thing, right? And people can't really visualize it, can't really, they don't understand the experience.
Yeah, I mean, residents been talking to us for several days about the kind of mesquite-like smell in the air. Smells like a barbecue or a campfire here. The sky is kind of white and powdery and hazy, so it looks bad and it smells bad. So definitely not ideal here. So the fire started burning on September 6th, and it's been growing pretty steadily every day since then. It is primarily within the confines of Angeles National Forest, which is a good thing in the sense that it's not totally creeping up into neighborhoods and places where people live, but it's a bad thing because it's creating a ton of smoke, a ton of poor air, and it is threatening those foothill communities, including Sierra Madre, which you just mentioned, that are sort of at the base of that national forest.
Do you live away from the fires?
I live actually right next to Pasadena in a neighborhood called Highland Park. So
Sure.
I'm not in an evacuation notice zone, but I'm right on the border of it. So I'm getting bad air quality and smoke here for sure.
Let's talk a little bit more about what people experience. I know from my experience for almost 18 years in Southern California, and especially the last 4 when I lived there, living in Sierra Madre. When the fires are bad, there's nowhere to go. I mean, unless you evacuate. But if you're staying in town, if you have nowhere to go, if it's the sort of like the current COVID conditions, people can't really move around. What is it like? What are people experiencing in terms of smoke and heat and air quality and so on?
Yeah, well, smoke and heat and air quality are kind of the 3 biggest things. From a heat perspective, August was the hottest August in California on record, and that contributed to a lot of the sort of dried vegetation that's really fueling these fires. And then from a smoke perspective, we are, I believe, on our 11th straight day of smoke advisories. Our air quality is hovering in the unhealthy to very unhealthy range. So all the guidance from experts on the air quality front are saying stay indoors, keep your doors closed, your windows closed. But that's creating kind of a psychological challenge for people who already felt really confined from the COVID-19 restrictions and now can't even go for a walk or a hike or a bike ride or any of the things that were kind of providing some respite from the pandemic. The other day I decided to brave the outside for a little while with my dog because she was going kind of stir crazy. So I masked up and I suited up as best I could. And I went to the closest park, and I saw this group of kids. There was a play set, like the swings and the slide, and it had caution tape all around it because it had been closed off for the pandemic. And the kids were playing, around the caution tape under a very brown, ugly sky. And the sun was kind of orange, filtered through this haze. And it was just a really sad scene. And my heart kind of went out to those. So it's a
Right.
massive, massive plume of smoke.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Hayley. Really appreciate all the insights you've given us into the experience on the ground.
Absolutely. Stay safe, guys.
Hayley Smith is a reporter with the Los Angeles Times who has been covering the Bobcat fires in LA.
That was my head. Are you video? Oh my God. It's the same as I had it.
That's the sound of me, my family, and the townspeople building a snowman last Christmas in my old hometown of Sierra Madre, California, near Pasadena. Yeah, that's right, a snowman in Southern California. It's not easy to get the raw materials, but it's a local tradition that every December, somebody gets a load of snow from high up in the nearby San Gabriel Mountains and brings it to Sierra Madre so that the locals can build the community snowman. A happier time for sure. But now there's fire in those mountains, and it's been burning close to Sierra Madre too. Things have let up a bit now, but the town was under an evacuation warning just a few days ago, and the Bobcat Fire, just northeast of the community, is still out there, burning and menacing. When I think about this, lots of things come to mind, like wondering, in addition to the risk of fire, is climate change moving so fast? Will those mountaintops in the San Gabriel Range be free of snow year-round? And will a beloved Christmas tradition be over in Sierra Madre forever? So you can take it from me and the rest of us here at Let's Talk About Water. Climate change is real, and the effects are coming at us fast. Today, it's the U.S. West Coast and the Gulf Coast. It's going to be somewhere else, perhaps someplace close to you in the not-too-distant future. You've been listening to Let's Talk About Water, and our special edition, Let's Talk About the Absence of Water in the Fire-Stricken Western United States. It's a presentation of the Global Institute for Water Security at the University of Saskatchewan. If you want to hear more, subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on Facebook at Let's Talk About Water Podcast, or on Twitter at LTAW Podcast. Thanks to our guests this week, Bill Patzert, Crystal Kolden, and Hayley Smith. Thank you to all of those who helped put the show together, including Mark Ferguson, Laura McFarlane, Amy Herget, Jesse Widow, our producer, Sean Perpick, and as always, Linda Lilienfeld. Thanks also to the Walrus Lab. I'm Jay Famiglietti. Be sure to listen again when we're back in 2 weeks. A reminder, if you set an alert on your phone or other digital device, you'll never miss another episode. Please review us. Give us a thumbs up if you like the show. That helps move us up the podcast charts. It makes it easier for new listeners to find us. And your comments are always welcome. See you again next time.